In this lesson, we're going to be creating a form so that we can create reminders from our user interface. To create this form, we're going to use the Python package WTForms. So first, let's install the package. So we'll go to our shell, make sure that your virtual environment is activated. You can see mine is. So I'll go pip install WTForms. So this should install the Python package. There we go. That looks like it's good to go. So we'll switch over to our code. Now, because the WTForms module is not an extension, we don't need to register it. We can just go straight to using it. So the next step is going to be creating the forms file. So within our application directory or our app directory, we'll create a new file. We'll call it forms.py. This is where we're going to house our forms. Okay, and then we need to do some imports. So from the WTForms module, we're going to import some form fields as well as a validation field. Or actually a validation handler, rather. So we'll go from WTForms import, and then I'm going to use some brackets just to keep it formatted properly. So we want to import the main form class, the base class for forms. We want to import a string field, a date time field, and a submit field. Now we also want to include the validation helper, which is going to be validators, and we're going to import that as V because validators is a long name, so we want to keep it a little bit shorter. Now last for imports, we're going to import a widget that's going to help us format one of our fields a little bit better. So we'll go from WTForms widgets import text area. Oops, there we go. Okay, so now we'll go down 2 lines from our imports. We're going to create our form class. So to do that, let's define a class. We'll call it reminder form. And this is going to inherit from the base class from WTForms. So we'll go form like that. So next we want to add some columns. First we'll add a column for message. So we'll go message is equal to, and message is going to be a string field. It's going to have the label message. And we'll add some validation to it, or some validators to it. So we'll use the parameter validators. And this parameter takes a list. So we'll go, we'll create a list there, and then we add our validation. So what we'll do is we'll use our import module validators. And inside that, there's a bunch of different classes. You can refer to the WTForms documentation to see them all. But for this particular column, we're going to go V, and then we're going to use length. We know that we want a minimum length of 1 for our message and a maximum length of 160 characters so that it's not split up into multiples. And then also we want our message to be a required field because we don't want any reminders without messages. So we'll go v.input required. There we go. So you can see, oops. Oh yeah, okay, so that's okay. We'll fix that in a minute. So what we've done is we've instantiated, for our validators, we've created a list, and we've instantiated 2 different classes and gotten 2 different objects. So one for length, where the minimum length has to be 1 and the maximum is 160. And then also one for input required, which just makes it so that this field is a required field when the form is submitted. Lastly, for the message field, we're going to add a widget. So we'll go widget is equal to text area. And this will just make it a text area field instead of just a regular input field. Actually, we have to instantiate that. There we go. So you'll see what I mean when we end up rendering the form in our template. Now you can see that our linter in our text editor is complaining that our line is too long. So I'll just go ahead and break that into another line so that it doesn't complain anymore. And there you go. You can see it's no longer there. Okay, so next we're going to create our send on field. We'll go send on, And for this one, we're going to use a date time field. The label is going to be send on. And then for our validators, I might as well break that into its own line. We'll add, really just all we need for this one is the input required validator. So we'll go input required, instantiate that. We're not going to format it in any way because for datetime fields, we're going to pass a format parameter anyway, and it's going to use that to validate against our data. So that's what we'll do next. We'll put in our format, and I'm just going to, what I'll do is I'll type in the string, and then we'll go over just briefly how it works. So year, month, day, and then we want our time, H, for hours, and then minutes. Okay. So this format string is what the field is going to use to check against our data format. So when we submit this form with the send on field, it's going to take the data for this field, it's going to compare it to this format, and it's going to try and create a date using this string. So what it's saying is it's expecting the date format to be year / month / day space, and then hour, colon, and then minute. Now the only difference between these capitals is when you see a capital Y like this, that means long form. So instead of like 18 for 2018, you're going to get 2018, or it's going to expect 2018 instead of just 18. And then the month is going to be, like 09 or 03 or whatever it is. So that's all we need to do for our send on field. So I'll go down one. And last but not least, we need a submit field. So we'll go submit, and we'll make that to submit field. And this is just going to take a label. So we'll go create. Now this is a pretty simple one. It's just going to make a button for us, and the button is just going to say, when you click that button, submit the form. So that's it for our reminder form. So hit save for that. You can X out, and then we can open up our views file. So next we need to import our form from our forms module. We need to add it to our views so that we can use it. So we'll go, we'll add an import. We'll go from forms, import reminder form. Okay. So now that we have our form imported, we're going to make some changes to our view to support the form. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add some better constraints to our view decorator. When you're working with views, you want to restrict the data flow as much as you can. And one of the ways to do that is to use specific method definitions or method restrictions. So what I'll do is I'll just add it, and then we'll talk a little bit about how it works. So we'll go methods, and this takes a list. So we're going to accept gets, and we're going to accept posts. So what this means is for this view, it'll only accept HTTP requests that are gets and post. So if we had something else, if we submitted our form in some other way using a method like put or delete or something like that, it would error and say that it doesn't support that method. So that'll just kind of keep it cleaner, and it'll make sure that we know the type of method that the request method that we're expecting. So next we'll move into our view, and we want to instantiate a reminder form object that we can use within our view. So we'll go form is equal to, and we're going to use our class reminder form, and we're going to instantiate that. But what we're going to do is we're going to pass it a parameter, and it's really just going to take the one. It's going to be request.form. So you can see the linter is already complaining. It's saying undefined name request. That's because we haven't imported the request object yet. So we'll go up to Flask and we'll add it. We'll go import request, hit save, and then it's gonna, you can see the linter is no longer complaining about it. And this is a good chance for us to talk about the request object a little bit to get a better understanding of how it works. When a browser submits an HTTP request to our application, the Flask object accepts that request, and then it creates a request object with all of the information that was included within that HTTP request. So within this request object, we have all the data that was included in that user's request, including things like form data, parameters, query parameters, and that sort of thing. So what we're doing here is we're instantiating a form object, and then we're taking our request object and we're passing the form data from our request object to our rendered form, or rather our reminder form. So that way the form object can take this data and validate using the validators that we added, or coerce the data into the format that we've designated for our form fields. What we'll do is we'll finish filling out our new view logic, and then we'll switch over to our template, we'll set up our form, and then once we have it submitting, I'll be better able to illustrate how the form validation works. So let's go down another line here within our view, and we want to do something if our form is submitted. So we're going to do a conditional check to check the state of the form. So we'll go, actually first we'll check the state of the view. So we'll go if request method is equal to post, and the form is validated. We're going to add some logic here. So let's talk about this real quick. So what we're doing is we're doing a conditional check. We're saying check the request method and make sure if it's post, and if the form has validated, which means it's checked the data and all the form valid, or rather all the form data is valid, then go ahead with this this code block under it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a reminder, right? So if we've gotten to this point past the conditional check, it means somebody's submitted a reminder, the reminder form, to create a reminder. So let's create the reminder. Let's go reminder is equal to, and we want to instantiate a reminder object. So you can see we haven't added any fields or column data to this reminder object, so we need to populate it. So the WTForms module or object comes with a handy little class for this. So you go form.populate object, and then we want to pass it the reminder object. So this will take all the form data that's been validated and is included in the form, and it'll pass it into this reminder object. So our message and our send on date is going to be passed into this reminder object. So at this point, we'll have a reminder that's created and has its properties filled in. So next, just like in our Python session, we need to add it to our database session and we need to commit it. So we'll go db session.add reminder, and we'll go db session commit, because we need to commit it to our database. Or just, there we go. So you can see that our linter is complaining. It looks like undefined name db. Now that's because we haven't imported our database extension, but that's not a big deal. We'll do that right now. So we'll go up here and we'll go down, add a line here, and we'll go from extensions import db. Now I like to keep, when you're doing different types of imports, at least personally, I like to keep them grouped in the way that they're being used. So you can see I'll do all my relative imports together like this, and then all my Flask imports are up here. So just regular imports from libraries, that sort of thing, and then just separate them with a line. This is just a personal preference. It just keeps things nice and clean, and it's just something that I like to do for my projects. So we'll go ahead and hit save. So we still have a couple more things that we need to do for our view. When we create a reminder, after we create it, we want to let the user know that it's been successfully created. So to do that, we're going to use the Flash module that we set up templating for. So we'll go Flash reminder created, and then we want to set the type of Flash, which is going to be success. And remember, we created a Flash handler that'll recognize this type of message or this string, and it'll add that to the class name, which will ultimately style it using Bootstrap. So that's an important one to remember. And then after our reminder has been created and after our flash is set, to make sure that the flash is rendered, we need to do a redirect. So we're going to go redirect, and we're going to go URL_for, and then we're going to do reminders.index. Okay, so we've got some linter complaints. Obviously, we haven't imported some of this, so let's make sure we do that. So it says undefined name redirect, and then I'm guessing undefined name URL4 as well. Yeah, so let's go up to our Flask module, and we're going to add both of those. So we'll go redirect and URL4, and it just fits within those 80 characters. So we'll hit save. And you can see our linter error is no longer there. So what we've done for the redirect is we're using the Flask redirect function and the URL4 function. Now the redirect function is pretty self-explanatory. You pass in some type of route and it's going to redirect the user to that route. But URL4 is sort of a magic function that Flask provides, and basically it's a URL lookup that you can use to look up URLs for your views. So what you'll see is I've passed it one parameter, which is a string, and I've passed it reminders.index. So reminders is referring to our blueprint. So it's saying look in the blueprint module, reminders, and get the URL for the index view. So then it's just going to return that, and then we're going to redirect it to that URL. So let's add a little formatting here. I like to keep the code blocks separate when they're large like this. It just makes it easier to read. Now one last thing that we need to do so that our form is available within our template is we need to pass it to our render template function, the same way we're passing our reminders. So we'll go down to our render template function, and we're going to add another parameter. We're going to call it form, and we'll make that equal to form. Okay, so I think that's it. Let's switch over to our index template, and then we're going to output our form. So let's get rid of our placeholder text, and this is where we're going to output our form, or we're going to render our form rather. So the first thing we want to do is create a form element, and we want to set the method for that form to post. If you recall, within our view, it's expecting the method post for the HTTP request. So that's how it'll recognize that the form has been submitted. Next, we're going to output our form fields. So first we'll output our message field. So let's go down a line, double curly braces, and then we're going to go form.message.label. So that's printing out the field label for message. I'm just going to copy that. And then we're going to go down a line, and we're going to output the actual field itself, which is just form.message. So let's just hit save. If you haven't started your Flask server, make sure you do that now. Mine's already running, so what we'll do is we'll switch over here, and you can see I've already hit refresh, but the message field, which is a text box, is available, and the label is outputting. So that looks good. We'll switch back over, and let's keep on going. We've got a couple more fields to output, so we'll go the same thing, but this time we'll go form.sendOn.label, and then we'll copy that, and we'll get rid of the label because we're just going to output the field there, and then we'll do the same thing for submit. So we'll go form.submit, but we're not going to use the label for submit. So we'll hit save there, and then go back over to Chrome, and we're going to do a refresh. Oh, it looks like we got an error. Oops, I must have spelled that wrong. So switch back over. Let's see here. From instead of form. There we go. Okay. So we got that fixed. Switch over. Refresh. There we go. Okay, so we got all of our fields, albeit in a really ugly format, but at least they're outputting. So it's kind of hard to look at, so let's switch over and just we'll just wrap it in some basic markup just to kind of keep things separate here. So let's create a div for each and this will kind of separate them into their own elements. So let's do this real quickly. There we go. Add some better formatting. Oh, that one's good. Okay, we'll hit save, switch over. Okay, there you go. You can see it's a bit better formatting. Still, it's not very attractive, but we'll get to that shortly. We just want to get it functionally working, and then we're going to spend some time, cleaning it up and making sure that it looks good. So let's check that it's working functionally. Let's try and submit. We'll try and submit a reminder and see what happens. So let's go. Don't forget to buy the groceries. And then we want to send it. Let's just say whatever this date is. Now remember, it's expecting a specific format, and the format is like this, but with some slashes. There we go. Remember, so it's 2018, so year, long form year, month, day, and then it's looking for hours and minutes. So this is the format that we defined within our form field. So let's hit create, and you can see reminder created is green, which means obviously success. So it looks like everything's working. Our flash came up, which is great. Our redirect worked because our flash came up, which means our redirect worked. And then also you can see over here in our table, another reminder has been created. Don't forget to buy the groceries. It's pending. It's supposed to be sent, or supposed to be sending on this date at this time. And yeah, it looks like it's working perfectly. So now let's do the responsible thing and let's try and break it. Let's put in a character limit that we know would be above 160 characters. So I'm just gonna send that in a couple times. There we go. So you can see it's a really big string. And we'll just paste it in. There we go. And then we're going to go create. Okay, and you can see I didn't get that success message. But what we didn't get is any type of feedback about why it didn't work. So that's going to be our next step. Our next step is that we need to output some errors when we have our errors. So let's switch back over to our code. So we have two fields that we need to create error handling for, message and send on. So let's start with message. We'll open some functional tags, and we want to go if form.message.errors, and then we want to close that up with end if. Oops, got rid of my tag close. There we go. So then within this block, we want to output our errors. So we'll create a list, an unordered list. We'll give it the class errors. We'll close that list up. And then for each error for the messages field, we'll create a list item. So we'll go add some functional tags, and we'll go for error in form message errors. We want to close this up, and for. Okay, so then for each one, we're going to create a list item, and we're going to output the error. And we'll close up this list tag. Oh my, there we go. Okay, so what we've done here is we've just looped through all the errors, which is going to be a list. Now hopefully it's an empty list, but if it's not, for each item within that list, we're going to output a list item with the error message within that list item. So let's check that it's working. So hit save, and then switch over to our browser. Now we can do the exact same thing that we did before, which is submit a message with too long of a message character limit. So let's go, I'll just hit create. And you can see some errors popped up. So now we're not getting a success message, but we're getting error messages that are telling us something's wrong with the form. The validator's caught some type of validation error, and this is the message output of that validation error. So you could say field must be between 1 and 160 characters long, which makes sense. That's what we were trying to break. So it looks like our form's working. Last but not least, let's create, let's do the same thing for our send on field. So we'll switch over to our editor. And then I'm just going to copy this, and then we're going to bring it down here, paste it, and we're going to change message to send on, and we'll go message send on. There we go. Because it's going to do the exact same thing, but it's going to do it for the send on field. So let's save that, and then we'll switch over to our browser. I'm just going to refresh, and then I'm going to make just a gibberish, some gibberish for our send on date. And there you go. So it says not a valid date time value. That's because it's not. It's not a valid date time. It's not a validator that we set, but it knows that it's expecting a valid date time, and that we have a format, and it's expecting that particular format. So you can see the errors there, and we can try some other ones. So we can get rid of all of it. Both of them are required fields. So if you go create, you're going to see this field is required for both of them. So this is a good example of form validation. It's a good example of keeping your application safe, keeping good application security, and keeping your data nice and clean and controlled. So this is all working now. It's working functionally. It doesn't look all that great, but that's something that we're going to address later. So let's switch over to our shell and commit our progress for this lesson. Okay, so let's do a quick git status, see what we changed. Okay, so we made changes to our index template, yeah, and we made changes to our views, and we created a new file, which was forms.py. So that all looks good. Let's go git add dot do a git status. You can see it's all added, or it's rather it's all staged and ready to be committed, and then we'll just make our git commit. Created and implemented reminder form. Okay, there we go. So that's it for this lesson. We created our very first form using WTForms, and we implemented that form within our view and within our template, and we're able to create scheduled reminders now. In the next lesson, we're going to be using jQuery to implement a date time picker for our send on field.